Welcome to Ask a Lawyer with the attorneys at Hepworth Holzer, life-changing law in Boise, Idaho. Today, it's John Kluksdal. John focuses on medical negligence claims and is an AV preeminent peer review, rated by his peers in Martindale-Hubbell. John answers your questions about the law and how it affects you.
John, why won't an Idaho lawyer take my medical malpractice case, even though it's clear the doctor committed malpractice?
Well, that is really hard in some situations, Steve, because in Idaho, we have plenty of situations where someone has committed malpractice. One that I've dealt with calls many times on is a situation where someone has been overdosed on medication by their doctor. So, for example, the doctor was supposed to give the person 10 milligrams of a medication, but they gave them 100 milligrams. And then the person overdoses and they're in the hospital for a day or two because of it, when they wouldn't have been otherwise. And so I get those calls all of the time, and I feel terrible for those people. I mean, who wants to go through that? But in the end, you have to look at, is it worth it for you, my client, to take on this case? Because ultimately you have to determine on a cost, risk, reward, conundrum, lineum, is it worth taking that on? And, sometimes it's not. And if you're going to spend $10,000 or $15,000, hiring experts to pursue a case that a jury might award you $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 on, then it's really not worth it for my client, my potential client, to take on that case. It just makes no sense from a financial perspective for them. And then there's many other cases where, that's a tough call. It is oftentimes a difficult call, but in Idaho, they require, for medical malpractice cases, a doctor of the same profession or specialty of the doctor that you're claiming did something wrong to testify at trial. That doctor breached the standard of care, and this is the damage that the doctor caused. And that can be very difficult sometimes to find doctors who will testify. Yep, I'm aware of their local standard of care, and I'm aware of this particular field of medical practice, and that person breached the standard of care. And so sometimes it can be difficult to find a doctor to testify on our behalf. And then many times, Steve, I get over 100 calls a year on medical malpractice cases. And frankly, I only probably take about 4 or 5 medical malpractice cases a year. And it's because it's so difficult to find doctors to testify sometimes. And so that is a whole bunch of information and a whole bunch of different factors that come into place as to whether I think a client should pursue a medical malpractice case. Sometimes the negligence seems obvious, but it's still not worth taking. Sometimes the negligence is not as obvious, and it's a difficult call for the client. Do I want to pursue this in the face of the fact that I might not win this case, and I could owe costs relating to having to hire experts? Those are difficult decisions for people to make.
Okay, so what if no one will take my case, or, it's not a case worth pursuing, but, I still was injured. What do I do?
Right. So if, going back to the most simple of cases where it seems like an obvious negligence case, but the damages just aren't worth pursuing, those people do have some options. The hospitals, for example, at least locally in Boise, and I think in most of all of Idaho, have some sort of internal review process. And you can call the risk management department of your hospital and say, hey, I've been wronged here. This is what happened to me. And they will usually do an internal review process. Now, I'm not saying that's always satisfying. But if they determine that the doctor or the nurse or whoever you think made the significant mistake, they will issue some sort of punishment if they agree with you. And so now it's, as I said, it's not very satisfying for someone who's been through a tough ordeal, but it is something if they want to pursue that. And then secondly, the Idaho State Board of Medicine takes complaints on doctors. And so if you think you've been wronged by a doctor, but you don't think the case is worth pursuing, go to the Idaho State Board of Medicine's webpage. It's easy to find. Just Google Idaho State Board of Medicine. And then they have different icons there that you can go to. A complaint against a doctor, I think, is one of them. And so you can do that yourself, and it's easy. And in some cases, it's probably the appropriate thing to do. If someone is very upset by what's happened to them, but they don't think it's worth pursuing in a medical malpractice case, then they can do that.
Is there a cost to call you?
No, my partners and I, frankly, believe that talking to people, evaluating cases, telling them whether we think it is a case or not a case, or we should review it further, we consider all of that part of doing business. It's just what we do every day. Like I said, I take over 100 medical malpractice calls a year. And we frankly consider it just, this is part of what we do and part of what we need to do for our community. Because frankly, if we took every case, that wouldn't do either the clients or us any good. But if we are telling people, ooh, I don't think this should be pursued for this reason or that reason, we think we're doing a good thing for that person and probably for the community as well, because, none of us want to see frivolous malpractice cases pursued. And so there is no cost to call us. Anyone is welcome to call us, and we'll talk to them, and we might tell them that we don't think their case should be pursued, but we think we're doing a good service if we do that.
Thanks for listening to Ask a Lawyer with the attorneys at Hepworth Holzer, life-changing law in Boise, Idaho. Join us next time as they answer your questions about the law and how it affects you. They can be reached at 208-343-7510 or hepworthholzer.com.